really means a lot. To start off, my name is Flo. I'm the founding design engineer at Paradigm AI. We're a YC-backed company based out in SF, and we build agent orchestration using spreadsheets. But the real reason why you're all here is I assume you care somewhat about design, or you're at least curious enough to learn. So today, I'll be diving into minimum viable design, how you can design products that work within the given constraints for hackathons and beyond. Please feel free to take a seat, anywhere that feels comfy. Oh, Ishan, so good to see you. Okay, sick. So I want to start off with a question for the audience. Who here has done a hackathon before? Cool. Who's doing it for the first time? First off, round of applause. It's great to see some people trying new things. And I want to ask, why do you think that some hacks land really well with judges? They go viral on dev posts, while others can't help but flop. Any takers? All right, Miriam. Okay, they look ugly. We don't like ugly things. Okay, valid. Ishan, please. Yeah, they're too complicated. Yeah, makes sense. Rustin. Okay, like too complex. Doesn't quite hit the needs that we have. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just it looks okay, but bad UX. I think that's more common than really bad UI.
What does that mean, bad UX versus bad UI?
I don't know, it's annoying to use.
Okay, so frustrating. Maybe it doesn't solve the right problem.
I was gonna say sometimes I don't think they understand the user workflow correctly, like UX is missing.
Right.
And then at least from what I feel is that usually your UX isn't usually because judges never see the facts in full detail. That's literally what they see when they're judging it.
Right.
And so if it's not clear to them, it's supposed to
be. Yeah, thank you so much. What was your name? Pranavi,
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so for people in the back, Pranavi brought up some really great points, which is that the judges or whoever's evaluating your project will never see the behind the scenes. Users will never see a Figma file, they'll never see your spec docs, but they see the end product, right? So how can we make something that solves the problem at hand? This weekend, you are all using probably the same APIs, the same time constraints, and similar demographics. You're young, you're ambitious, and you're here to build something interesting, right? So let's break down why some things flop. And then the rest of the workshop, we're going to cover a framework for minimum viable design. We're going to look at some projects to see how you can apply it to something real. And last but not least, some quick polish wins for typography and beyond. Then we'll wrap with a little Q&A. But before we dive into design stuff, I actually want to ask, do we have any Canadians in the crowd? Woo! Okay. I was supposed to be at Hack the North this weekend, but here I am in Boston, because you guys are very important to me. So, for Janet in the back. A little bit about my own background. I actually started off in engineering, like I'm sure many of you here, engineering CS. But I didn't study computer engineering or software engineering, but instead biomedical engineering. And despite that, I always worked in design. So I did product design first with the Ontario government, and then I worked in-house at startups and data research dashboards before doing an independent design practice starting a few years back, where I would work with clients who are both very early stage and some who are post-IPO. Most recently, I've been a design engineer. I worked on V0, which Ishan is my predecessor at Vercel, if any of you are familiar with the product. And currently, I do design engineering at Paradigm as their founding design engineer. So these roles might sound really different, but I just brought this up because I wanted to say that at the end of the day, the underlying processes are very similar. Whether you're designing medical products or devices, to designing UI or UX, to finally writing code yourself and shipping PRs to production, at the end of the day, you're still thinking about the same things in your design. What are the constraints? What are your intentions? And what is the hierarchy of the things that are most important? This is an array of some different projects across different industries I've done across the years. As you can see, there's anything from quantum computing to AI to DeFi, because I had a Web3 phase and I'm not ashamed of it, just a little bit. But that's to say, even though these industries are so diverse, they also share the same underlying principles when we take a problem, our initial state, and we look at what the goal is and how design really helps us bridge from the initial state and helps us find the end, right? So when people are starting off, they often don't quite know how they want to approach a design problem, which leads us to a very winding, convoluted path. It's not the most optimal. And what I want to introduce to you is a process in which you're just trying a lot of things, right? If you notice in the second graph here, there's so many rays emanating from the same point of origin. And that means that we're not afraid to kill our darlings. We're taking out pen and paper. We're trying things that are really scrappy. And we look at the least bad thing on our piece of paper and say, okay, I want to explore this a little bit further. And then from there, you keep branching on and on until you find a solution that's just a little bit closer to what you're actually looking for. So something that I want to introduce is the idea of setting in a tent before you actually build. You might ask, what does that mean? What does that look like? So I want to pull up an example of something that we should not be doing, okay? Exactly, right. So it's what do you mean? It's the Hydro AI Pro Max revolutionary AI-powered hydration optimization platform, powered by machine learning, blockchain verified, IoT ready. Like, what does that even mean? So the prompt was, make me an AI hackathon project with a weak thesis and bad design. But okay, yeah, we can agree that's bad, but can anyone tell me why? You shout on it first. I want to hear from you, Aryan.
AI is not very good at design. They have they find common patterns and they have like a very average design and they all look the same. And you look at this and instantly it's like white code.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, vibe coding's not all bad. I made some cool stuff with vibe coding, but
you just told them how to make it. You didn't give it any.
No, valid points. Valid points. It's what I want to hear. Right. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, where does AI fit in, Vinny?
It's just like a lot of stuff just thrown into the screen without much thought. There's not like any story, I guess, for a user to go through. It's just like information.
Right, exactly. So these are all really good points on what we don't want to do this weekend, right?
Call them all right, buddy.
Nice. That means when the singularity comes and they take over, at least they're going to be nice to me because I call them buddy. I get at least painful death. Anyway, so that convoluted UI probably could have been solved with something so simple as you didn't even need to open Figma. This could have been a post-it note, you guys. Could have been an email. So with that being said, I really want you to encourage to think about design not as necessarily just designing software, but as creating solutions to problems that you actually have, right? Sometimes the best solution is a piece of paper that you can write on and slap on your laptop to remind you to drink water on the hour. Sometimes it looks like a bash script. But at the end of the day, we don't want to fit our designs to the tools that we have, but instead use the tools to create the design that will solve our problem at hand. So why does this suck? We have some great, ideas from the crowd. It's convoluted. There's no hierarchy, but there's no clear problem thesis. It's using tech for tech's sake, right? And it's probably just saying AI. There is no AI. It's just a vibe-coded V0 thing that I made in a minute. There's overstuffed UI. There's no hierarchy in this because everything's thrown onto one screen. It's very difficult to discern what's actually important, right? The only primary button here says to add water. But there's so many different colors and headings that the user really doesn't know where to focus their attention. And at the end of the day, it also doesn't quite fit what we're looking for in terms of a hackathon. I think scope is something that's very important. You don't want it to be so big that it's not something you can actually ship, nor do you want it to be so small that it's trivial. So how do we find that good middle ground, right? Now, hacks flop when either the intent, hierarchy, or constraints aren't clear. So let's dive a little bit more into what it means to have each of these three objects in practice. But first, I actually want to ask an even broader question. Some of you have been at the previous workshop, so this is a little familiar, but what is design? I'm really curious what people in the crowd might have to say. While you enjoy your ice cream, it looks delicious. Any takers in the back, please?
Yeah. I think it's like the process of creating something, especially something that's visually appealing.
Okay, visually appealing, interesting. Good answer, thank you.
The HCI, this definition from the book I read is it's the bridge between humans and machines.
Interesting. Okay, I appreciate that you cited a textbook. I will add that I think design is something that you can really apply to everything around us. When we look around this room, someone designed that logo. someone designed the lighting here, someone designed these windows and the blinds. So while HCI is a great, point of reference for a lot of us, especially as we're designing software, I want you to just broaden your thinking even more. I saw a hand in the back earlier, but Ishan, yeah, and then.
I think like coming up with like approaches to open-ended problems.
Yeah, coming up with solutions, right? And I saw a hand here.
I was gonna say, I noticed like the medium between the form of like the actual functionality of what something is going to do and how you want the user to feel after. So like the user experience is part of like what could
Right. What about designing for things that aren't human? Is that still design? Like if you were designing like a bowl for your dog, or if you were designing a script for a machine?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we just focus on the experience of the user, and that doesn't necessarily have to be.
Brought some really great points from the crowd. Thank you for sharing, everyone. The definition that Google gives you, if you put this in a query, is design is the intentional process of creating plans, sketches, or concepts for something new, like an object, system, or experience to solve problems or meet specific goals. So that's a lot of word salad, right? Let's break down what that actually means. Lots of great points that everyone touched on, but it includes two main components, one of which is the intentional creation of an artifact or a plan in order to solve a problem or to bridge some gap between your initial and goal state, right? So with that being said, I'll give you an overview of what this workshop is and what this workshop is not. So this workshop is designed to help you pick up some fundamental frameworks, right? As we break down why we do design and not just how, as well as we'll touch upon the hallmarks of good design. But at the end, I'll share this Figma and hopefully y'all will have some more resources to walk away with. What this workshop is not is, this is not Figma 101, this is not how do I make things pretty, and nor is it a step-by-step tutorial. So I think there's lots of great existing resources online and I wanna make the most out of your time here. So now that we've touched on some of the basics, what design is, why some designs suck, we're gonna talk about minimum viable design. So I think the really great thing about hackathons is that it gives you such tight constraints, and constraints really unleash some creativity. Because you're locked within this 48-hour window, because you're within the specific location, you're really forced to work with what you have, right? And in order to design within these constraints, I want to introduce this framework of like 3 important things to keep in mind. We love triangles, Versailles reference. But let's start off with your intent. That's the most important thing in your design, because if you're not really solving a problem, why does it exist in the first place, right? I think a lot of things just happen to be in the world and no one really thought about why. Secondly, we'll focus on the constraints at hand. So what are the things that must be done in order to make this a successful build or a successful project? And lastly, we'll look at hierarchy as a way to really draw the user's attention to where is most appropriate given your intent and the constraints. So how do we set design intent? Intent is the clear reason why your product or feature exists. It's the outcome that you want for the user. Like you said, it's how the user feels at the end. It's the goal that we want to impart upon them upon using it. And without intent, your product looks random, like our wonderful Hydro Pro Max AI slop, or it looks tech first, where tech becomes more of a puzzle that you're trying to like jam your piece in, but it really doesn't fit. But you're like, oh, but I love blockchain and I love AI. I would just love to build something that uses this API. But we want to look at all these tools and think of them as ways that we can leverage our existing skill set to build something that's actually useful, right? So when you do have intent in your product, every decision, be it the layout, the color, or the feature choice, has a rationale. Because our intent is blank, we chose blank. Cool. And now I'm going to touch briefly on hierarchy, right? Because sometimes you look at something, you're like, I don't know where to look. Everything's screaming at me. And when everything is screaming, nothing is really saying anything, right? It's only in the use of constraint and kind of like self-control in our designs that we're able to highlight the things that are most important. So when we look at this interface, right, from lumber liquidators, there's a lot on the screen right now. Wow, 99 cents? No way. Flooring trends? Okay, I don't really know what to do with this. Yeah, and I think sometimes, it might solve the problem at hand, But typically when we're designing software, they're for much more constrained workflows, right? Like if anyone here has used Linear or Airbnb or any of these products, they have a very clear user profile in mind. And to solve it, they're very precise in their decisions as well. Whereas I think maybe this could work for some specific, user group, but that's probably not the user group you're designing for at this weekend. Meanwhile, if you look at ChatGPT and you're trying to create a new chat, there's literally nothing on the screen except for the text box, right? So that's the only thing that you can interact with here. Or if you press the buttons, which are a little bit more hidden away. But products like Claude and ChatGPT, they make it very, very clear to see what is the primary purpose of this page. When you're designing a product, each screen should have a clear call to action. It can be the most prominent, it can be the one that the user should focus on the most among many, but the user should know immediately what they're meant to do. I think sometimes when you look at more complex products like a code editor, there's so many different objects that you can interact with, right? But I'm still curious, there's something that draws you to it most, right? So with hierarchy, it's really the use of things like typography, negative space, color to draw your attention to where it matters most. I actually want to pull up an example of a product that I use every day and I love dearly. Has anyone here ever used Cron or Notion Calendar? Okay, fair number of people, right?
That schedule is crazy.
I have Anna's schedule overlaid on mine, but we can hide it. Anyway, so as you can see, like, what are the things that stand out to you the most on this calendar? Yisha, please. Pardon?
The actual like calendar part.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
The most like prominent and biggest, like the most attention to that.
Yeah, yeah. Like anyone else? What stands out to you?
My eyes are drawn to like the current day right now because that's the one that's not clear out. Like in a lot of the open space, like I'm able to see when the blocks of free time are. He's got some rest, so
yeah, I'm doing well. I just have multiple people's calendars on this, so don't stress it. Don't stress it. It's not just one. Yeah, and anyone else? Any takers, please? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So here you can see that color's been used very intentionally to highlight not just random pieces of the UI, but objects that the user might care about. So here, that specific events on the calendar. If you notice, wherever this bright orange is being used, it's to denote the current time and date, right? So you'll notice that on the 13th, it's highlighted not only here, but also in this calendar view. It's also highlighted for the current time right now. And that's really important because when I look at a calendar, I want to know, okay, where am I right now? What's happened in the past, which is conveniently a lower opacity, and what's going to happen in the future. To give you a little bit of backstory on Cron, this project was actually created by a guy named Raphael Shad, who did his PhD right here at the MIT Media Lab. And his problem was that when he was doing grad school, he was super busy, right? Everyone around him is super busy. So these people really value their time, but they were stuck using crappy software. So, like I loved Google Calendar past tense. Some people might use Apple Calendar, some people might use Ami or so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, these tools weren't as malleable to suit these very specific needs. So Raphael had a clear thesis. He's from Switzerland, he studied engineering there. He wanted software that felt as precise as a classic Swiss timepiece, right? So what does that mean when we translate it to software? Well, when we think about the ergonomics of software, something that can be very helpful is a Command K toolbar, right? So say I want to schedule a one-off meeting. I can, type in what I want to do. I can find the people. I'm able to hide and show calendars. It just makes it very, very easy. Using Cron, you're also able to send scheduling links to people. So, if there's like a slot of time that I'm considering, I can highlight that on my calendar. Then I get a copy paste link to send directly to someone. And it just makes it very ergonomic, very easy to use, right? So at the end of the day, when you think about each of these decisions, there's a higher underlying intent and thesis, which is that people really value their time. So we need to build the tools that are malleable and sophisticated enough in terms of giving them this functionality that they're able to do just functions that you want handy, like very quickly and very easily. So with that being said, the ways that you create hierarchy in your own designs are size is something that's very top of mind. When you look at Cron or Notion calendar here, the largest piece of typography is the time, or like the current month, right? Like September 2025, it's bolded. And things like color, we talked about how he uses the orange very intentionally. It always denotes the current time or the current date. The use of contrast, the use of alignment, you'll notice like grids being used all throughout, and grids help the eye just align where you want to keep the user's attention. Cool. And lastly, the thing that we're going to touch upon before we dive into more practical applications is constraints. So at a hackathon, time is of the essence, right? The things that you want to think about most are, how can I create a scope that will fit within this 36 or 48-hour time frame? And how do I use the tools at hand with the team that I'm equipped with to build something that's most effective and solves your goal? So here, however long the hackathon is, the skill constraint, as well as the sponsor APIs. And when we think about going back to intent, how can we come up with a solid idea to tie everything together? I want to use the idea of an onion, because everyone's familiar with onions. We probably eat them multiple times a week. And the way that I want to think about it is, when you look at a design, think about it like peeling an onion, right? When we looked at Cron or Notion Calendar earlier, what we see here are colors, we see typography, we see layout, we see white space, but that's the most surface level, right? Once we break it down another layer deeper, we have to ask ourselves, why did he make these decisions at each level? Why did he choose these colors, this typography, this font, this weight, this outline, or this layout? And at the end of the day, each of these surface level decisions leads to an underlying intent, right? And all of these small micro decisions culminate into something much larger than the sum of its parts. So with the surface, this is what you see, things like copywriting, so on and so forth. When you break it down, each of these draws to something that's related to who's using this product, where they're using it, what they're using it for, how they're using it, and the underlying context, right? Because here we really want to ask, like, what is the problem that's being solved? And lastly, with your intent, this is where we bring in the okay buddy again, like, all right, buddy, like, what's your plan? How are we going to solve this problem given the intent and given the surface that we're dealing with? So this is what I like to think about as our hypothesis in design, right? Everything that exists in the world is because someone somewhere had a thesis that the world should be a little bit different than how it already is. Because if you were perfectly content with the status quo, why would you bother making anything, right? So when we break it down a little bit more, the things that you're keeping top of mind are, who are your user? What are they suffering with right now? Like, what's the whole point of why this new thing should exist? What's the goal state that you want them to be in? And how are we going to use design to be the bridge between this goal and initial state? So a template that you can use as you're thinking about your own projects is, we help user in initial state reach goal state by mechanism or decision. So some examples. We help students who forget assignments, I've been there, stay on track by turning their syllabus into reminders. So now that we have a clear idea of what we want to achieve and who we're serving, there's many different form factors that this could take. Perhaps it's upload a PDF of your school syllabus, some sort of ML model will extract all the relevant dates, or it could even be like a regex that you write, and it creates like a .ics file that you can upload into Google Calendar, right? So because we have a very clear idea of what we want to achieve, we can work backwards using the tools at our disposal. So we've already talked about Cron, we're like going all over the place. But at the end of the day, Raphael Schatt had a clear thesis, which is, the busiest people value their time. They need a better way to manage it. So I'm going to create the tools that will allow them to do so with things like Command K shortcuts, different keyboard shortcuts, and just things that are very well thought out. And I'll give you a little demo of Paradigm as well, which is what I work on, to show you how we applied this to a real life product, right? So if anyone here has ever done like very manual research, you know that it can be tedious if I'm, say, doing research on startups, right? So once the Wi-Fi cooperates, this is an example of something that I designed with the team. We wanted a way for it to be really easy for folks to come up with templates. And before we actually look at the live product, I want to show you what the product looked like before I joined the team, right? So as you can see, there's a lot of differences from what you see here and what's currently live. So if anyone's ever played like Spot the Difference, I'm curious if folks can maybe call out some of the things that they notice here. These are also different pages. Let me. Cool. So these are both template pages, right?
The left one is the old one.
Actually, what do you think is the old one? I'm curious. Which one do you feel like maybe needs a little bit more love than the other? They could both use a lot of improvement, I'm sure. Hassan.
Well, the left I feel like is the old one, and there's just a lot of text going on. It's hard to find, I think, what you're actually looking for.
Okay, interesting. There's more text on this one within individual cars than the other. Yeah.
That one has less text, but I think it communicates more neatly because I can see like all the different types of the templates, and I can kind of peer inside of them already, so I can see visually like, oh, I can imagine like what it would be like. So I think I guess it's
That's an interesting point. So even though it has less text, you're still able to fit maybe the same amount of information in this one, but have it for each of the cards. That's a great point. Thanks.
Like I was gonna say, like you have more text boxes visible in the left and the right one than in the left one. So like if you just like quickly peer over, you can like try to find the one that you're looking for since there's just more information there to see.
you can evaluate faster.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like we're saying there's less of a cognitive load, right? And when we look back at, I see your hand, we'll come back. When we look back at the principles in this image here, the way that hierarchy is created is through things like size, color, contrast, alignment, so on and so forth. So when you have something that's overloading you with text or with colors, it's very hard to discern what's actually important, right? But with design, you're trying to strip away everything that is unnecessary. What is the minimum viable interface to communicate the idea or get the user to achieve their desired outcome? Curious what you wanted to say.
I wanted to say, I think the sizing and the spacing is a very good thing. In the second screen, you can see like two very distinct sections. And the first one is harder to see that because the sections, I mean, you can see two rows, but they're much closer together. And also the tiles are so big that it's a kind of wider range for the user to kind of pay attention to.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really great points with like white space, typography, and contrast here. Like when you look at the size of the text, here the title is actually bigger, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has more contrast in the hierarchy, right? Even though here it's smaller, we also use a divider, right? And because these cards are more uniform, you can see that there's distinct grouping by the amount of space that you have between and apart from groups. Yeah, what's up, Aryan?
Also, say if you go to the other one, the text is bolded for the sidebar, which is distracting. I don't think you need people to pay attention to there.
Right, these icons are a little dark, if you ask me, you know? And here, even things just reducing the opacity of what's in the sidebar, reducing the opacity of the icons, even a shade bit more than that. You'll notice that they're a little bit lighter. And I learned this during my first co-op at Waterloo. But actually, if you make icons a little bit lighter than the text, it works because the icons themselves are visually heavier, right? There's more lines filling up the white space. So when you zoom out, you actually don't really notice that there are different colors, but that was still a decision that someone had to make while building this interface, right? So I think when we look at designs like this, it's very easy to just feel like, oh, wow, you know, like someone just slapped some rectangles together and called it a day. But at the end, when we look at software design, we realize that there's so many decisions that usually go unnoticed. And that's really good because if the designers and the engineers do their job right, you shouldn't have to think about these things. They should just feel right. So let's pick a template. We all like startups, so let's use this one. And basically, what Paradigm is going to help me do right now is do all this research in parallel, right? Because you could imagine that maybe I'm a VC or maybe I'm someone researching startups and I want to just gather a whole bunch of information on, you know, when this company was founded, how many employees they have in order so that I can do my due diligence and come up with a proper decision. But you'll see here that this product now enables me to just gather a lot of complex, you know, manual research very, very quickly. Like I can't even imagine how long it would have taken me to fill all of this out manually, right? But with this being said, can anyone maybe offer an idea as to what they think the product thesis was here? Why was Paradigm made? Why does this product exist? Like, please.
Someone was probably doing research and felt like it took a lot of time and
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I spent my whole day filling out a spreadsheet. What if an AI could do it for me? Thank you so much. Like, anyone else want to offer any ideas or a different perspective? Please. Yeah.
I don't know, like they saw an opportunity, like they realized that there's a lot of people making AI tools for writing other parts of work, and they realized spreadsheet is another part of work, so they wanted to fill the gaps.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think when we consider things like an AI spreadsheet, there's actually a lot of different products trying to do similar tools, but then they all have different theses, right? Like Microsoft is doing an AI expression that allows you to fill out cells. But then for us, the way that we're trying to approach this is less so a spreadsheet with like complex formulas, but more so, okay, the user is probably doing a workflow in which they need to collect research that takes many steps to accomplish, right? Like, how might we make it easier for them? So this isn't necessarily focusing on things like financial modeling, which is another great use case for spreadsheets, but instead the spreadsheet happens to be the form factor. Less so we wanted to make a spreadsheet and happen to like jam AI into it, right? So they're two very different ways of looking at products. Cool.
I have a question.
Please, yeah.
Can you go back to the previous?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to.
Is the button a gradient?
The button here, it is a gradient.
What's
yeah.
the design decision behind that? I personally don't like gradient buttons. But
okay, so that's an opinion. Right. I would say that when it comes down to things like this, a lot of it is then determined by creative direction, right? So when we look at some products, we're like, why does this one make me feel warm and fuzzy while the other one feels like war? Like Palantir. But that's because once we're able to fulfill the functionality of a design, then there's room for creativity, right? There's a slide that I liked but didn't like enough to keep in, so I took it out. But basically, we have like a hierarchy of needs in design, right? Once you're able to fulfill things like functionality, reliability, resilience, then you can think about creative direction. And with Paradigm originally, the founder, Anna, she wanted it to feel like magical, right? We've since shifted our creative direction, but with that original intent, it was, okay, how do you make things feel like delightful to use, right? And sometimes gradients also add more depth, right? So there's lots of different ways, as long as the gradient serves a higher purpose. So whether it's to create a feeling of depth, as you can see here, it looks like there's a light source, right, in the plus button, because we want this to feel like it pops out of the page a little bit more than the other buttons, because this is like a primary action, right? There's also like a subtle like bounce, you know, there's an easing curve there. There's a subtle shadow of blue under the button. So all of these things culminate because our higher idea was, okay, these actions are important, so we're going to use blue. And to make it look even a little bit more 3D, we're going to use a gradient. So that's some of the reasoning.
Oh, I would.
Please.
Sorry, is that the end?
Yeah.
Do you have an example of what Paradigm looks like with like a very large spreadsheet? Like, because I feel like, like I don't know, like 60 columns, like thousands of rows, like there's like I wonder like how you make like I feel like that's where you see like the most like need for something like this, where like, you need like a lot of things to be like filled in and done automatically. I wonder how that looks in like a design, like how you like able to not like overflow and things like that.
Right. So what I think is really interesting about that question is, at the end of the day, even whether you're dealing with 10 or 10,000 cells, the underlying principles of the UI are still the same. You're not going to see a fundamental shift in behavior, right? So what that would look like if we had like 1,000 rows is basically this, but it's just a lot longer. Right, so we don't have different overflow behavior. For example, if you wanted to expand everything, you're able to see it like this, or if you want it more condensed, but fundamentally it would still be the same UI. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions before we move on?
So sorry, a few minutes away.
Yeah, okay. This workshop's a little shorter than the previous one. We originally had an hour, but now it's been cut to 45. But I'll just leave you with this. Thinking that design is just how something looks is to believe that beauty is only skin deep, right? And yesterday we used this analogy of if you're looking for a significant other, because the holidays are coming up, you want to go home and you don't want your parents to be like, why are you still single? You're about to graduate soon. I'm expecting grandchildren at some point. But when you're looking for your life partner, right, and you're only looking at the surface level, I think that's kind of a recipe for a miserable life, because what are all the other things that you're not indexing on, right? I think beauty is something that comes from the character of an individual. What are the things that they value? What about the things that they care about most? How do they treat their friends? How do they treat their work? And with design, it's very similar in the sense that it's much deeper than what you see on the surface of the UI. But when you dig into the UX of it, when you dig into the product decisions and the underlying intent and even the architecture, right? Like, for example, why write a backend in TypeScript versus Go versus Rust? Well, one of these languages compiles a lot faster than the other, but there's also a much higher learning curve, right? So even when you're thinking about building the software, there's still design decisions at every level. Why would you use one framework versus another? Why use one API over another? You're thinking about things like cost. You're thinking about things like developer experience and ease of learning for your team. So I want to say that design is not just how it looks, but also how it feels, also how it works, and also how it's built. So because we have 15 minutes left, I'm just going to jump straight to the takeaways, which are when you're building something, especially in a hackathon setting, it's of the utmost importance that you have a clear intent, that you know what you're building, that you have a clear product thesis, you have a hierarchy where you're able to focus attention on where it matters most, and you understand the constraints or the playground, the sandbox that you're playing within. And I really love this quote. I also shared it yesterday, which is, as you become an adult, you realize that the things around you weren't always there. People had to make them happen. But only recently have I decided to internalize how much tenacity everything requires. That hotel, that logo, that speaker, whatever, that outlet. At the end of the day, the world is a museum of passion projects. And I really urge you to take this weekend as an opportunity to ask yourself, what is it that I'm curious about? What is something that I want to build a passion project in? And this is just an amazing outlet for you to explore not only what you care about, but what makes you you. Because at the end of the day, through your design decisions, they impart upon your worldview, how you see the world and how you think the world should be. So constraints don't kill your creativity, but they're what's going to make your hack work, especially in this very special environment of a hackathon. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and we have 2 minutes for Q&A. Thank you very much. Please, Aaron, you're very active. Appreciate it.
Do you ever have to consider how a design is going